The aim of this presentation is to review the effectiveness of prisons in the UK as a form of punishment and provide alternative suggestions where appropriate. I feel the arguments regarding ineffectiveness are stronger and will be focusing more on these. The current explanation of purpose given by the UK Prison Service is to reduce the risk of reoffending and provide safe and well-ordered establishments in which prisoners are treated humanely. The loss of freedom that comes from a prison sentence is not intended to be enjoyable, but punishment itself has a deeper meaning than purely causing discomfort. The two approaches to justifying punishment are categorised as consequentialist, which is also known as utilitarian, and prioritises reducing crime through deterrence and incapacitation measures. It argues the suffering of punishment is only relevant if it results in more pain being avoided, aiming to achieve the greatest good for the greatest number. On the other hand, the non-consequentialist or retributive stance is backwards looking. It places moral blame on the offender and seeks to proportionately punish them for crimes already committed. Punishment is used to reinforce the law and show that criminal behaviour will result in a certain degree of pain for those responsible. However, the pain of punishment is also considered necessary in order to outweigh the pleasure of committing crime and to deter others from doing so. Punishment often removes the physical ability to offend, while the rehabilitation aspect aims to remove the desire to offend. This is intended to protect society from potentially dangerous individuals, alongside providing justice for the victims of crime. The threat of prisoners' punishment does deter many from committing crime. For example, I personally refrain from breaking the law because of this possible consequence. But in December 2016, the prison population was 85,583, which is just over 1,000 spaces away from the maximum capacity. And even taking into account the increase in general population, the number of people in prison per 100,000 increased by 72 between 1990 and 2005. The rising rates of imprisonment and consequent overcrowding suggest not enough people are being deterred by prison, an argument which is only strengthened by the 60% reoffending rate found in 2014 for those serving sentences under 1 year, and 46% for those who were incarcerated longer. The flaw with championing prison as an effective deterrent is that there are other forms of punishment that may be just as or more effective at achieving this. Another argument to seemingly support the claim that prisons are effective is that they protect society from criminals by removing the ability for them to offend. But as reoffending statistics suggest, there is no guarantee custodial sentences provide long-term protection to society from offenders that have failed to be rehabilitated. Criminal events like the 2011 London riots saw many young people with no previous convictions handed prison sentences to serve as a warning to others not to engage in similar disorder. One young adult was imprisoned for 6 months for stealing a £3.50 bottle of water. Prison is a particularly ineffective form of punishment for situations such as this, as the cost of sending the offender to prison completely outweighs the cost of the crime, and causes a lack of trust in the system for the offenders that have been disproportionately punished. It also does not provide complete deterrence, as similar riots were repeated in 2016. Custodial sentences do not let offenders see the consequences of such crimes, and the long-term consequences of prison can in fact cause more harm than the initial crime. In fact, the harm caused by prison often extends further than the offender. It can leave children with absent parents, add pressure onto partners that are left with no economical or emotional support, and have an overall negative impact on social relationships, especially if offenders are sent to a prison far away from their home, as this can make regular family visits impossible for some. External factors such as a stable job, family and home prove to have a significantly positive impact on levels of recidivism. Research by the Prison Reform Trust indicates that the likelihood of reoffending was 39% higher for prisoners who had not received visits whilst in prison compared to those that had, showing the future harm that can be caused by lack of contact with family. Often this harm only increases upon release, as the offender tries to reintegrate into society after being defined by their crime for the whole time they were incarcerated. This means many adopt the culture of prison during their sentence, a process described by Donald Clemmer as prisonization, which can have the opposite effect to rehabilitation for some. Further evidence of the ineffectiveness is the failure to fulfil the formal aim of keeping prisons operating as safe and well-ordered establishments that also treat prisoners humanely. Between 2010 and 2013, there was a 30% reduction in prison staff, despite the rise in prison population discussed earlier. The Howard League for Penal Reform reports the numbers of assaults, homicides, and incidents of self-harm to have all increased significantly between 2015 and 2016, and shows that order and safety are not always achieved. On top of this, the treatment of those with mental health needs in prison has been a notable issue ever since it was first pinpointed by reformer John Howard over 200 years ago. Despite improvements since then, mental health of prisoners is still a largely neglected and misunderstood problem. The Prison Reform Trust disclosed that 25% of women and 15% of men in prison suffered from symptoms of psychosis, compared to the 4% of the general population. Segregation units within prisons are used to house the most challenging of prisoners, most of which suffer from mental disorders, and are reported by the Prison Reform Trust to be characterised by social isolation and inactivity, both of which have proven to have a negative effect on the mental health of prisoners. The units are a step backwards from rehabilitation, as they provide shorter periods of exercise, telephone and showering time, alongside limited personal contact and a lack of stimulation and education options, which fail to reach international prison regulation standards in some UK establishments. This demonstrates a lack of humane care for prisoners and means those with mental health needs could be released in a worse mental state than when they entered as a result of such units. So what are the alternatives? There are other options that serve the purpose of punishing in a more productive and effective way. For example, reoffending rates for those that were punished with community payback, which sees offenders of low-level crime complete unpaid labour work for local establishments that require it, were found to be at 36%, significantly lower than the 60% that reoffend following short custodial sentences. The average cost of a community payback sentence is £2,800, which is much lower than the cost of £50,000 to incarcerate a petty criminal for a year, reported by the BBC. For crimes that are deemed to require longer sentences of punishment, the UK could learn a lesson from the Norwegian penal system, the aim of which is to rehabilitate criminals in relaxed security prisons that mirror outside life as much as possible. Two examples are Holden Prison and Bastoy Prison, which encourage positive interaction between inmates and guards and are set out more like communities that have many educational and recreational outlets in order to stimulate inmates to learn a new skill or pick up a new hobby. This reduces levels of violence, disorder and mental health problems which can stem from the frustration and boredom of prison. The humanitarian style system raises complaints of being too soft. However, at 20%, Norway has one of the lowest rates of recidivism in the world, and so shows evidence of successful rehabilitation. The National Audit Office found the cost of reoffending between 2007 and 2008 to be between £9.5 and £13 billion. So lowering recidivism could also financially benefit the UK in the long run. So when asking yourself the question, which is the right punishment, the answer may at first appear obvious to you, but when judging the effectiveness of any means of punishment, there are many variables to be considered, such as what the crime is, who the criminal is, and how the punishment will affect society. Prison does not appropriately address all of these variables. Punishing offenders in a way that prioritises providing them with help, support and education may not be considered harsh enough because of our cultural views on what punishment should be. However, the rise of imprisonment and stable levels of reoffending suggest a change is long overdue. Perhaps it is time to try a softer Norwegian-style approach, as if too little emphasis is placed on rehabilitation, which seems to be the case in the UK, and prisoners continue to reoffend at the rates discussed, prison can be described as ineffective as punishing 46% of its inmates, and will result in these offenders continuing to cost the taxpayer money after release. If other public services, such as schools or the NHS, had a success rate as low as 54%, would they be allowed to continue operating as they were, whilst costing nearly £24 billion a year? Criminals are just as important to handle correctly as the young and the sick in order to build a better society, and current UK prisons do not appear to be effective at doing this. Thank you.